Então, galera, para aquecimento do lançamento da nova expansão The War Within, o grande Chris Metzen, o grande Chris Metzen deu uma entrevista falando sobre a saga, a World Soul Saga, o que ela é, o que ela representa. E óbvio, como tá todo mundo super hiper hypado para a nova expansão e principalmente pela volta do Chris Metzen, muita gente pediu aqui para eu dar uma olhada nesse vídeo, por isso a gente vai ver aqui ao vivo, na live. Eu não vi o vídeo ainda, vamos fazer um react do que ele vai falar aqui sobre a World Soul Saga, tá? Mas galera, antes de começar, só um pequeno detalhe explicando quem é o Chris Metzen, que muita gente durante as minhas lives me pergunta isso, porque nem todo mundo é um jogador veterano do World of Warcraft, né? O Chris Metzen, basicamente, ele é... Não dá pra chamar... Se você quiser chamar até de criador do World of Warcraft, estaria certo. Mas ele seria muito mais a pessoa responsável por toda a lore. Talvez você pudesse dizer até que ele é a alma do World of Warcraft. Por quê? Ele foi contratado pela Blizzard durante o Warcraft 1 para ser o desenhista. Ele fazia desenhos, né? Só que o que aconteceu? Como os desenhos dele eram muito bons e ele tinha uma boa narrativa, já a partir do Warcraft 2, ele começou a ajudar na história do jogo. E de lá para cá, ele passou a ser responsável não pela história do Warcraft, mas de todos os jogos da Blizzard. Ele é a pessoa que criou esse lore que fez as pessoas se apaixonarem no Warcraft 2, no Warcraft 3, no próprio World of Warcraft. Tá? Então tudo em relação à história veio da cabeça também um pouco exagerado, porque todas as pessoas também ajudaram. Mas, assim, a visão macro do Warcraft, qual que é a história, o que vai acontecer, tudo isso veio do Chris Metzen. Ele é a pessoa que criou a história do Warcraft, assim como ele que criou a história do StarCraft, do Diablo, do próprio Overwatch, sacou? Ele é a pessoa criativa que fazia essas histórias dentro lá da Blizzard, né? E ele deixou a Blizzard ali no final de Legion, e voltou agora, e ele que está sendo responsável pela World Soul Saga. Agora ele trabalha só com Warcraft. Antes ele trabalhava com a Blizzard, com todas as sagas da Blizzard. Agora ele está só com Warcraft, né? E ele que é a pessoa que está por trás da World Soul Saga. Tanto que foi ele que deu a ideia para fazer a World Soul Saga. A expansão, a nova expansão seria The War Within de qualquer maneira. A Blizzard já estava trabalhando com War Within, né? Mas ele que deu a ideia de fazer um arco de 3 expansões. Mas talvez ele fale disso aqui no vídeo. Vamos dar uma olhada aqui no vídeo, porque é bem interessante. As pessoas que já viram falaram que é bem legal. Vamos lá.
You know, morphing into orcs would work, but
no, I didn't either.
It's been a privilege working on Zerg orcs.
Hi, I'm Scott John.
É só um pequeno detalhe. Essa piada que ele fez de início é que muita gente acredita que StarCraft é o mundo de Warcraft no futuro. Existe essa teoria dos fãs há muitos e muitos anos. Nunca foi confirmada, nunca foi desconfirmada também, né?
Johnson.
O Kaspersky ficou maluco. Galera, você vai poder ter a melhor proteção para o seu computador com 80% de desconto. Você escutou direito, o melhor antivírus do mercado, mais barato que uma Coca-Cola. Mas, Codex, o que é o Kaspersky? Boa pergunta, porque o Kaspersky não é só um antivírus. Ele é o programa de proteção mais utilizado no mundo inteiro. Ele é um antivírus, um anti-malware, proteção de privacidade para ninguém hackear sua conta e você perder todos aqueles itens que você comprou na loja do jogo, e proteção bancária com a melhor criptografia do mercado para você pagar todas as suas contas no seu computador com o máximo de proteção. Tudo isso no mesmo programa, tudo isso na mesma conta. E só até o final desse mês eles estão doidos e estão dando 80% de desconto. Você vai pagar menos do que R$6 por mês no Kaspersky. É isso mesmo, menos de R$6 por mês. O que você vai ter que fazer? Aqui embaixo vai ter um link, você vai clicar nesse link e vai usar o cupom LORDMONS. Importante, o desconto é no link e no cupom. O link dá 50% e o cupom dá 30%. Então, se você quiser o desconto completo, tem que usar os dois. clica no link e usa o cupom LORDMONS, tá bom?
The host of the World of Warcraft podcast, The Instance, and today I'm sitting here with Chris Metzen. Chris,
Scott, it's good to see you, man.
good to see you. How you feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good. You know, it's a crazy time. We're about to launch The War Within and, you know, really kick off this massive World Soul saga, which is a trip because, you know, I haven't shipped a video game in, you know, 8 or 9 years. So it's kind of wild going through this process.
Kratos da Shopee. Essa foi boa, desculpa. Kratos da Shopee, desculpa, Chris Metzen.
Again, and just kind of feeling that anticipation, you know, excited to see what people think, and when the product finally gets into people's hands, it's one of my favorite parts of the whole development process.
Well, let me ask you this question, because you reminded me of how long this has been going. I remember firing up the World of Warcraft OG vanilla World of Warcraft and seeing a trailer that said, celebrating 10 years of Warcraft. And I remember then thinking, you gotta be kidding me, that's insane. That's how long I've been playing these games. And now we're 20 years on top of that, 30 years total. That has to be a little overwhelming, especially given that you were here for most of that.
Vocês perceberam que eles pararam a cinematic no Warlords of Draenor? Eles não passaram a cinematic que vieram depois?
Had a bit of a break, now you're back. Does that weigh on you? Do you feel the heat from the time? Like, how do you feel about how that entire process has gone?
I don't feel kind of heat or like the weight of time, you know, relative to expectation.
Detalhe,
It's really weird, you know, being a little older, a little wiser. Feels like 100 years ago, feels like 5 minutes ago, all at the same time. So when I look at this World Soul Saga, the stuff we're building right now, thankfully there's an immediacy of it all to me. It's just, we live and die by, you know, how good, you know, the things we're sculpting in real time is. Trying to hold it all in your head, the weight of the past, you know, it's kind of beyond me. I can't really wrap my head around like all the history all at once. I mean, there's kids graduating college right now named Jaina and Anduin. It's like, what? I often find it's not all that helpful to overdwell on, you know, in the course of development. You want to keep it focused on what you're doing at the time. So that's how I try and balance it out. One day I'm sure I'll look back and go, wow. Working on this game again has really given me more of an immediate sense of gratification that just kind of keeps you focused in the moment. And that's generally, you know, where my head is at on a day-to-day basis.
When you mentioned people naming their kids after characters that you created, that you named, and that you developed and saw grow and evolve and everything. Something that's interesting about War Within so far, to me, is we're seeing the gang kind of back together in a much more complete way. So you're seeing Anduin talking to Thrall.
Por que eles colocaram tanto Troll, tá? Pra quem não sabe, o Troll é o próprio Chris Metzen dentro do jogo, né? Por que o Troll se aposentou em Legion? Porque foi na época que o Chris Metzen se aposentou da Blizzard, tá? Quando fala que o Troll é o próprio Chris Metzen dentro do jogo, é exatamente isso. Quem dá voz ao Troll dentro do jogo é o Chris Metzen, e até o caminho do que acontecia com o Troll, ele que definia, né?
With Jaina nearby and...
Sabe aquele... Desculpa parar tantas vezes. Sabe aquele GM que tem o seu personagem favorito e tudo que acontece de bom é com ele?
Khadgar, my favorite worst wizard of all time, but I love him. He's there. They're all there. Yeah. And what that tells me is that we're in for some coming together of a lot of strings, a lot of stuff that has been out there for 20 years that will finally converge in some meaningful ways. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
I'll break it down. When I came back, you know, I'm like, all right, let's go, World of Warcraft. Like, what do we got? What are we making? And they were in, you know, they had already been doing War Within, or what would become, you know, War Within for about 10 months. While I liked what they were building and thought it was a cool next chapter in WoW, in my head, I'm like, for the 20th anniversary of WoW, like, I want to have a feeling, like whatever the product becomes, I want to have a feeling of pulling all the toys out of the toy box, right? They like older characters, you know, the kind of macro themes that, you know, the series has been about all these years, Titans, Old Gods, Light and Dark. I wanted to feel like the anniversary was capturing, you know, like this kind of mix of all of the core flavors, and ultimately proofing out that there has been this storyline all the way through, that everything kind of converges into this crescendo. and in a very real way, how the war within was shaping up. They're like, yeah, dude, like there's no way on earth, right? That, you know, that's going to divert the course of mighty rivers. There's no way to get that done on top of what we're already in production on. So that begat this idea of a larger saga. I'm like, okay, well, what if we can get there in X number of steps? You know, what if we can build to something just ridiculous, you know, but it might take a couple expansions to do. And somehow folks, you know, bought in on it, like, whoa, that's, you know, that's wild, let's go. And so...
Isso daqui é muito interessante que ele acabou de falar. Porque eu já sabia, né, porque ele já tinha falado disso, de que foi ele que deu essa ideia da World Soul Saga. Beleza. De que a próxima expansão seria The War Within. Ok. Agora, pelo que ele falou aqui, a expansão, pelo jeito, seria bem diferente do que a gente estava imaginando, né? Seria bem diferente do que a gente está tendo agora, né? A minha sensação é que eles estavam fazendo mais uma expansão tipo Dragonflight, mas uma mais do mesmo, sabe? Não tinha... Porque pelo que ele tá falando, não tinha esse sentimento da gente do crescendo, da gente chegar no final, né? Não tinha isso. Pelo que ele tá falando aqui. Vocês concordam comigo? Sabe? A sensação que eu tenho é que seria mais uma Dragonflight. Não que fosse uma expansão ruim, mas... seria uma expansão que a gente ia para debaixo da terra e ia enfrentar os Nerubianos lá, talvez tivesse Xalatat. Mas essa sensação de que, sabe, a ameaça tá crescendo, tem uma coisa vindo, foi do Chris Metzen. O que é sensacional. O que é sensacional. Sacou? Porra, eu não sabia que o impacto tinha sido tão grande assim, não, dele na história, né?
Taryn Gregory and I, Taryn's our, you know, principal story developer. So we work together every day, and you know, we talk a lot about, like, we want to involve all these epic characters, but like when they're in the scene, they eat all the oxygen, and they could just go off and solve for X. So it's this balance between including all these mega characters and then finding clever ways to get them out of the way, you know, so that the player has maximum agency and the newer characters we're introducing have space to breathe and live.
It sounds like it is almost an advantage to come to something that had already been started. If you'd come to the end of Dragonflight and started from there, that's a little big, it's a bigger buy. It's like, well, wait a minute, where are we going now? We've been flying, okay, what does that mean? What do we do? And instead, you were presented with some beginnings, and then you got to decide where those beginnings took you.
And vector it a little bit. You know, the trick to, after all these years, you have creative direction, which even today, I don't know that I could do a thesis on, right? Creative direction is as unique as the person doing it and the chemistry of the team that you're working with. But kind of finding that balance again of having strong ideas and kind of saying, like, I want to go this way, right? But the team had already been, kind of constructing this thing. So it's a mix of maximizing kind of the things that they are most passionate about, the ideas that they're kind of dug in on, and finding a way to bend everything towards a singular purpose, but boosting their sense of ownership.
So when you got up on stage at BlizzCon,
Quer dizer que, então,
it was pretty magical for players.
Pelo que ele falou, então, o rumo da história também não seria esse, né? Cara, a sensação que eu tenho vendo ele falando isso é bem interessante, de que parece realmente que eles estavam seguindo a formulazinha, cada expansão é fechada nela mesma, aí tem uma nova expansão com uma nova ameaça, e vamos continuar fazendo a mesma coisa que a gente sempre fez, como se nada tivesse acontecido. Se o Chris Metzen não tivesse voltado, seria muito mais do mesmo.
I can say that for myself and a lot of people that I know, and a lot of fans of the game saw this as a return to something. And I think we're coming off an excellent expansion in Dragonflight. But you got up and did something that surprised everybody, which was, we're not doing the normal, here comes the next expansion, here are the features, here's the storyline in its basic way. We are going to do a trilogy of essentially games. You spoke a lot about bringing, tying up some loose ends, but also creating a saga that is 3 parts, at least, and setting up really the next 20 years of the game, perhaps. That's very different than what any of you have done up to this point. Mm-hmm. Did that present unique challenges to the way you wanted to create story, the way you wanted your characters to progress, these sorts of things?
Yeah, it created all sorts of complexities. you know, under the hood a little bit, it's interesting in how, when I came back on the team, the development process and even the conceptualizing process, you know, like where does the expansion take place? What are the main themes? What's the focus? Really had become much more democratized, right? And people were, you know, had kind of found their voice in the balance of all the special teams that comprise the World of Warcraft team. You know, they'd really built the vision of Dragonflight together. So as I came back in, woohoo, and you know, there were folks going like, oh wow, how is this going to change our dynamic? You know, in terms of, you know, being a creative director, like, will we still have a voice? Will we still, you know, have stakes in how this all shapes out? So, like I was saying earlier, kind of learning that again and learning that balance again, and coming in as creative director and be like, no, you know, I'm not here to be, you know, hyper prescriptive with everything as I might have been as a younger dude, but like really listening for the team's instincts. Like, what are they responding to? What do they want to build? What do the artists want to make? What are they imagining in terms of that pure vision? So on top of that, the complexity of, I mean, I don't think this gives up the ghost on anything. Like, we're building 3 of these at a time. This is, yeah, I'll say it. It's insane. It's insane, yeah. Right? On top of the team, you know, over a year ago, having committed to like an 8-week cadence. Yeah. So these folks are, we are moving so fast, you know? And so the difference here is, you know, guys like Taryn and I have to map out where we're going, like way ahead of the caravan, which is its own really interesting kind of work, right? You know, checking in with everybody. Does this feel cool? Everybody hip? You know, I want to make sure that we're building things that, you know, not only, again, my instinct feels are cool and fun, but that the team is proud to build and that they feel they have a voice in and, you know, can express themselves through where the story's going, what the ideas are. We're already mapping out, you know.
Aproveitando aqui para falar, ele entrou numa questão aqui que eu pensei que ele não fosse falar, porque é meio que dos bastidores, né? Porque vocês viram que ele falou sobre essa questão da democracia, de que quando ele voltou para o projeto, quando ele voltou para a Blizzard, tudo era muito mais democrático, né? Nos bastidores, a gente já tinha escutado sobre isso, de que quando o Chris Metzen voltou, foi um pouco de choque na equipe, tá? Que algumas pessoas não gostaram da volta dele. Por basicamente 2 motivos. O primeiro motivo, porque ele representava a antiga Blizzard. Ele representava aquela antiga Blizzard que teve problemas. Apesar dele não estar envolvido em nenhum dos problemas, ele era da geração antiga. Então ele representava a antiga Blizzard e tinha muita gente que não queria mais essa antiga Blizzard. Queria uma nova Blizzard e achava que essas pessoas não tinham mais espaço. O curioso é que essas pessoas que não queriam nada com a antiga Blizzard, queriam uma nova Blizzard, não eram pessoas que estavam trabalhando na Blizzard há 20 anos, são pessoas que estavam ali há 2 ou 3 anos e queriam dizer para onde que a Blizzard deveria ir. Então você teve um choque, né? Talvez até geracional. E ao mesmo tempo, outro choque que aconteceu na equipe, que a gente ficou sabendo nos bastidores, foi essa questão da democracia no processo. Porque quem está no mercado de trabalho deve ter sentido de que as gerações mais novas, elas gostam de trabalhar de uma maneira mais democrática, né? Como assim? Elas não gostam muito quando você tem um chefão, o cara que comanda. Elas gostam tudo de você fazer por equipe, por conselho, sabe? Por comitê, sacou? E a Blizzard, ela não trabalhava assim. A Blizzard, você tinha o Alex Afrasiabi, que era o diretor criativo, o Chris Metzen. Quando ele saiu da Blizzard, ele era o diretor criativo da Blizzard. O Alex Afrasiabi, ele era o diretor criativo do Warcraft. Só que o Alex Afrasiabi era o cara que estava no meio de todas as acusações. Ele estava no meio das acusações, né? E ele mandava, sacou? Ele era um cara que era muito competente no trabalho, mas era um escroto. Do pior tipo de escroto, sacou? Mas ele comandava. Quando ele saiu, a equipe, ela não queria continuar daquela maneira, né? Ela queria uma coisa, não queria centralizar o controle numa pessoa só, né? E isso é bem interessante ele ter tocado, porque isso é um rumor que... não é rumor, né? Isso é uma fofoca que circula na comunidade já há algum tempo, e até por isso muita gente acabou saindo da Blizzard durante esses últimos 6 meses. Algumas dessas pessoas que saíram da Blizzard saíram exatamente porque não concordavam na direção que o Chris Metzen estava dando para o World of Warcraft, tentando voltar um pouco para o WoW do passado, sacou? Tentando voltar um pouco para o que era o World of Warcraft E também para essa dinâmica de você ter uma cabeça central comandando, sabe? Não fazer tudo por comitê. Ah, vamos decidir. Vamos bufar aqui o Warlock? Vamos, junta a equipe inteira. O que você acha? Ah, acho que tem que ser 5, acho que tem 10. Porque demora pra caramba, né? Mas vamos lá. Achei muito interessante ele tocar nesse assunto, que é um assunto que é muito debatido nos bastidores. E ele mesmo falou, né?
Whatever, 13.1, 13.2, and how they actually play out and connect, and it's wild. But in a way, you get to step back and see a far more cohesive vision and a far more refined idea over time. So, and without, again, without.
E cara, assim, sobre esse outro ponto que ele estava falando, que ele já está pensando no 10.1, no 10.2. Sinceramente, ele está falando isso como se fosse uma novidade. O que me choca é que a equipe antiga não fazia isso, sabe? Que eles já estão pensando 3 patches à frente. Aí a gente entende por que a história é uma zona. Ele começa uma lore aqui, aí no meio a lore vai para o outro lado e de repente a lore vai para o outro. Claro, os caras não projetam, os caras não estão trabalhando 3 patches à frente, os caras não preparam a história. Me surpreende ele estar falando isso como uma novidade que eles estão fazendo, que deveria ser o básico.
Spilling any beans, it's like, we're already talking about.
Sinceramente, essa entrevista aqui pra mim tá sendo sensacional, porque ele tá falando dos bastidores, tá falando como é que é a produção, sabe? Aquelas coisas que a gente conversava entre a gente, como é que a Blitz não faz esse tipo de coisa? Ele tá confirmando, eles não faziam realmente esse tipo de coisa.
More regularly, so in a way, just staying ahead of that curve and making sure that everything, again, is of purpose and telling this much longer story. It's been a blast. The pure creative on Warcraft, for the past year and a half has been, how would I put it, over such a long span of time. I want to say it's one of the most nuclear creative phases I've seen for Warcraft. But the pace is wild, right? Like the pace is wild. And it's like I ain't 30 anymore, so we joke around all the time like, we need to start instituting, company naps in the middle of the afternoon for the old folks. But it has been pretty amazing.
That's a great way of thinking about it. Speaking of personal connections to characters and story, somebody close to you, who I think is a very wise human, once said, online somewhere, that Chris is Anduin in some ways, kind of worn out, beaten up by a straight period of like nonstop work, right? But also on the other end of it, he's a little bit back to being Thrall again. And those two characters represent these two parts of who this person is. How much of these characters moving forward, or even in the past, have represented you where you were in your life? Like some people say, well, the early versions of these characters are they were so metal. Like even Tauren chieftains, they look like, these metal dudes and everything. And now they're aging, right? They're maturing. They're moving on in the world. Like you are, like everyone who's worked on this does, like that's time. Do you think that's a fair thing to say, that we'll see these characters change and evolve in the same way that maybe you have, and that they're kind of your avatars?
Yeah, no, I know where you're going. So there's kind of an A and a B there. Like the B, which is easier, is certainly we want to push these characters forward. We want to show some aging. We are currently doing that. But yeah, we talk about that a lot. There are many new characters over the arc of the saga that we don't want to be just one-off. We want them to be, pals and working together to, solve these big problems. But certainly the characters that have been around a while, we're trying to kind of find a way to like capture that age up, not necessarily age out, but like, okay, so in that cinematic at BlizzCon, they went in and put like gray streaks in Thrall's hair. I'm like, oh.
It looked great.
It got me. It's like, whoa. And just Anduin, staring you down, it's like our little boys all grows up, it's
feel for him. You're supposed to feel for him, right?
Which was the point. But just the idea that these characters are moving through their own continuum and progressing and moving through stuff, like, what a trip, looking back from where we started to the point where these are fairly fully realized characters within this setting. And it's just incredibly satisfying that way to see that progression. And certainly us as storytellers, as people, as we, it's not necessarily, it is certainly getting older, but it's also just experience over time. Big life moments, becoming parents, finding love, finding your career, all these big kind of life, hurdles. It's like, you know, I tell folks all the time, like, don't be afraid to pour yourself into this stuff. You know, even when you're like, oh God, will the people down the hall dig it? You know, will I be judged? Like, yes, probably. But the answer is you're an artist. Go get it, right? Find your truth. Because often when, you know, we're pulling from a place of like deeply personal experience, someone's going to feel that on the other end of the line. You know, as you're playing the game, it's like some of those themes that really matter. Whether you're a writer, quest designer, narrative folks, cinematics, you know, like the game design, you know, like everyone kind of pours themselves into their craft. And the more genuine that is, and I think sometimes the more risk you take, I think you get more genuinely affecting content. I think people feel that, they feel you in it one way or another. There are many themes embedded in the World Soul Saga, evidenced by different characters, that are very pointedly things that I think today, or I'm struggling with today, for sure. But again, I think about it in terms of like, as the team's creative leader, that's not the job as much. I think the job is like trying to learn to call them out, you know, and challenge them to kind of breathe their own experience into it, as opposed to pouring my own in. So it's a balance.
I assume that's what, over time, you have a character. We'll stick with Thrall for a minute. He's, you know, probably the most well-known of the Chris Metzen. Certainly voice him. So
until they find somebody better.
Until they find somebody better. Maybe you'll age out of it. I don't know. We're getting there. But no, that you've breathed enough life into that character and given them enough direction over so much time that I have to think, in a lot of cases, they start to run on their own gas. And while I'm not asking you to tell me if there's any tragedy coming at all, we're not even suggesting it here.
I have a kill list.
Do you?
I've got like my top 12 characters, like they're all going.
Why is Khadgar at the top of the list? I kid, I love Khadgar.
There's no kill list.
All right, good. But you know what I mean? You might find yourself going, well, it might be time for character X to take a character dive.
You know, so there's no, I'm kidding, there's no kill list necessarily. But we do talk about this stuff all the time. And the only, you know, when you start talking about knocking off main characters, it's not a small thing. And usually that is in service to, in the general story you're developing, if you really need to punctuate, you know, dramatic stakes, the easiest thing to do is ask Lucas, blow up a planet, or, you know, knock off a main character.
Tyrion Fordling, for example.
Tyrion.
Remember that?
Yeah, I do.
I remember that.
I'm still
vocês fizeram com Tyrion, hein?
Yeah, that was rough. No pressure, though. I'm just saying it was a rough moment.
No pressure. You know, so we do talk about it from time to time, but we try and frame it with, you know, the greatest gravity possible, and trying to be clear that, you know, this franchise has another 20 years in it. You know, it's this big ongoing idea, and losing critical characters is costly. So it's, you know, we talk about it from time to time. I won't tell you we won't lose anybody over the arc of the saga. Those types of moments are all about establishing stakes and that emotional, you know, engagement from the player ultimately. So, you know.
Does it help populate the World Soul Saga as a creative place to know that over the last few years, while you were gone for much of it, the team has made a real effort or a priority out of having allied races discovered in the world that players can not only unlock but then be and might prefer over the originals or whatever. Like, this additional diversity for choice seems like a really potent way to fill your world with more interesting characterization rather than just, well, it's orcs and humans and a few others.
Yeah. I love it. You know, just old school D&D and you know, all these options on, you know, player expression, what kind of, you know, what culture you want to be from. I love that kind of stuff. So opening that up, especially like, you know, Battle for Azeroth and, you know, the inclusion of all these new silhouettes and flavors or whatever, I thought was awesome, actually. And even the ones I didn't think I would play, I wound up, you know, I rolled a Volpera hunter. And then I consistently dress him like Robin Hood from the old Disney movie. So it's like, I actually really dig a lot of the flavors that have been added over time. Like it's in my opinion, the water's warm, everybody in the pool, you know, I think WoW can stretch and grow to, you know, encapsulate all of these flavors. I think giving, you know, players more options, more visual options is awesome. At the end of the day, I think you know, erring on the side of, you know, player choice, player agency is the right move, like why you're playing this game in the first place, right? When you imprint, especially when it's your character, when you imprint on a look or a vibe or, you know, like a vision that you connect with, it's like, go, get it.
So let's bring it full circle to what is imminent, which is the war within. Players have a lot of expectations. Some of it is based on just excitement because there is a 3-part saga coming. They're not used to that. There's a whole new structure to this. So what would you say to players who are pins and needles about this next expansion, the start of the big grand story?
As we were talking about earlier, we've never been in a situation where we've shaped the whole giddy up, you know, all at once. So there's the adventure component of the War Within, and then there's the max level campaign, and then there's the, you know, the subsequent patches, and it's all been designed to kind of play out over time. You have narrative threads and sinews, kind of, you know, linking everything together. It's, personally, a little biased, but I think it's off the hook, right? At the end of the day, I would want people to remember it is still only, however, part 1 of a much, you know, a much larger narrative. And I would want people to look at it that way. You know, it's meant to rise and, you know, crescendo with its own max level campaign.
Will I be expected to walk in Quest 1 and yank the sword from the planet?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I would say to that, I'm glad you brought that up. Actually, the sword, the resolution of the sword that we started with at BlizzCon, actually, that's a 13 thing. We're gonna build to that, and it's a doozy.
One does not simply yank a sword from Azeroth.
I would even say you are not prepared for that moment, and leave it at that. But it is a 13 issue. Ultimately, you know, things like Zal.
Por isso que acho que foi o Palapão que fez um vídeo falando que tá confirmada a volta do Sargeras, que ele acha que o Sargeras vai voltar e vai tirar a espada. Eu já falei isso aqui antes, hein? Eu já tinha falado que isso vai acontecer. O Sargeras vai ajudar a gente.
As a very different kind of villain. She is not like a Deathwing type, you know, villain where, you know, just he's flying and burning everything and like, oh crap, you know, we're gonna, you know, like, clearly he's where the storyline ends. She's built in such a way that like we're gonna be confronted by her and face her multiple times over the arc of the saga. So it's not going to be this, you know, one and done type like, oh, you know, she's the raid boss. You know, she's meant to, you know, kind of weave in and out of events over time. So that's something I would say. But definitely the sword thing sticks in my head. You know, like certain of these themes are built to play out over time. So I hope people are into that. I hope they're into, you know, a longer form engagement. Because in a way, you know, so many of our expectations kind of, you know, crystallize around like, well, wait a minute, I didn't get the full meal I was expecting in 11.0. It's not built to be that. It's built to be part 1. So buckle up, you know, the ride will be, I hope, insane and insanely fulfilling. Going back to that promise of the 20th anniversary of World of Warcraft, like, I want this saga to feel like it is just the perfect crescendo of 20 years of storytelling, you know, as we said at BlizzCon.
Yeah, there is a sense that we are fulfilling something. The 20 years came and will end this November. I guess November's launch, right? Yeah, 20-year anniversary will be this November. Yeah. And there is a feeling, I can tell you from the player side, of really coming to something special. And I know that puts pressure on the team when players collectively have an idea that they think should happen, and then the team's like, well, we're kind of going a different way. But I don't know that I've felt this much positive feedback in a long time about just where things are headed. And nobody says that about a 20-year-old property usually. Usually we're like,
there's not a lot of precedent we have, right? Like that's the same contiguous project. There's plenty of game series run for 20 years, no question. But like, it is honestly a blessing and a, you know, often sometimes a hindrance. Just trying to, you know, sift through the sheer volume of all of these details. Poor Sean Copeland, right? You know, just trying to keep it all, you know, make it all make sense. But it is also its principal strength. You know, particularly because it's an MMO and a video game, because you've lived these moments. You didn't just passively watch. You didn't just, you know, read a book or watch a movie. You've lived these moments and they matter and there are stakes, you know, so as complex as it is to try and push the world forward without breaking everything that came before, which is its own kind of challenge. It's a very noble challenge, right? It's a privilege
Em nenhum
to
momento, se eu não me engano, eles botaram
tread
a
water
cinemática
in this
de
complexity
Shadowlands.
of this setting. After all of these years, it's amazing that it's still the same stakes. It's still the same world that you've always known.
Well, there's a future I see where you're, you know, reclining in some sort of chair.
With the blanket over my
Blanket
knees,
over your
sitting by a
knees,
fire,
keeping you warm, and you're looking back and you're thinking...
telling kids to stay off my lawn. I
Yeah,
know,
exactly. And they're all in their haptic suits playing whatever version of WoW they have. And looking back at Grandpa's accomplishments, and I think it looks like something to be pretty proud of already. Well, I, for one, could not be more excited about this next expansion and the entirety of the World Soul Saga, and I think you and your team should be proud, and I wish you guys nothing but luck in the next few weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks so much, Scott. It was good
Obrigado,
fun.
Chris Metzen. Obrigado, Chris Metzen. Grande parte da empolgação da próxima expansão é por causa da sua volta. Cara, eu gostei bastante dessa entrevista, principalmente as coisas que ele revelou. Não é que ele revelou, mas que ele tocou em alguns pontos que já se debatia há bastante tempo sobre esses bastidores e para mim ficaram claros, né? Sobre essa questão de que eles realmente estavam indo numa outra direção e o Chris Metzen puxou eles. Não, vamos fazer isso aqui, vamos terminar essa história, vamos pensar adiante. Cara, achei sensacional por causa dessa parte. Eu tinha visto o pessoal falando que ele revelou sobre o futuro do jogo, sobre o que iria acontecer. Na real, pra mim, ele não deixou escapar nada, sabe? Pra mim, parece muito mais wishful thinking, né? Wishful thinking vontade... como seria a tradução de wishful thinking? Vontade que a coisa aconteça, sabe? O cara fala assim, é o Havaí! Não, ele não falou Havaí, é você que quer que ele, quando fale seja Havaí, né? Pra mim pareceu muito mais wishful thinking do que qualquer outra coisa. Mas, pode ser. Eu gostei bastante da entrevista, principalmente por essa... Cara, porque o Chris Metzen, ele é foda porque ele fala do coração, sabe? Nada contra o Ion Razicostas, tá? Eu sei que tem muita gente que tem raiva do Ion Razicostas, né? Porque acha que ele destruiu o jogo, por ele ser um Raider, né? Eu não coloco toda a culpa nele, porque a gente não sabe até que ponto... Ele é o chefe, beleza. Todo chefe, quando tem uma coisa errada, é culpado, né? Mas o problema é que quando ele fala, ele é advogado, então ele fala e não chega a lugar nenhum, porque é aquele... Desculpa, advogados. Mas é aquela conversa, sabe? Enrolação. Vai e continua no mesmo lugar. O Chris Metzen não, ele fala, ele entra nos assuntos e foda-se, porra. Porque ele é um jogador como a gente, né? Ele é um gamer, sabe? O Morgan Day também tem essa direção, sacou? Então, gostei bastante dessa entrevista.